scale to happen, somebody has to want scale. Because a lot of things are very successful at a modest level, and the people who do them are quite happy doing that. They're serving an audience, they're meeting a need, and they don't feel any particular compulsion to go to scale. Our audience is when somebody does want to go to scale, and when they recognize that the problem is much bigger than their current intervention, and they're looking for some way to try and make that happen. And it turns out that there are a series of pathways people can follow, but really they group into three. The first we call expansion. And in expansion, the organization that does it small itself grows to do it large. So think of it as McDonald's going from one branch to thousands and thousands around the world. The second is what we call replication, which is the pilot development gets it working, but with the intention that someone else is going to pick it up, either the government or a large corporation, or someone else is going to take it the rest of the way. So the people doing the pilot have no particular aspiration to get big themselves. They want their idea to get big, but not themselves. And the third are we call collaboration. And collaboration are the whole range of public-private partnerships, or sometimes public-public or private-private partnerships that try to bring together the strengths of different organizations, all of which somehow contribute to a model for scale. But the thing is driven in every instance by someone or some set of someones who really see a problem that's not getting addressed and that they're anxious to see addressed on a larger scale. Really, there are only two platforms that can take things to scale sustainably. One is governments, the other is markets. So if there's a project which isn't integrated into markets or isn't integrated into government systems, by definition, it is not going to be sustainable at scale. So any scaling strategy involves a strategy for either getting it adopted and incorporated into government programming or getting it somehow mainstreamed in markets. So if you look at the strategies for scaling, there's some variation on one or the other or both of those ideas. If you start from there, you'll see that the things that work for pilots often are completely untenable for doing in either of those ways. They're too expensive, they're too particular, they've got some charismatic NGO that's involved in trying to do it, they've got some donor that's willing to love it for a while. Neither of those things are scalable. And so the logic of it has to be breaking out of that, using that to learn some lessons, but simultaneously to build a pathway from there either to governments or to markets. So if I was going to relate that back to a case, I think I might pick on the case of near-coast fishing, where the issue was the thousands and thousands, in fact millions and millions, of people who make their living fishing in close to shore, and a lot of evidence that those fish stocks are being seriously depleted. If you tell people to stop, they'll simply ignore it. You can't enforce it hard enough. If you try to simply engineer your way out of it with science alone, it's not enough. You could do it on a very small scale on a pilot program, and someone would say, did you have proof of concept? Yes, you had proof of concept, but only when you had that level of oversight and that level of control by the people doing the implementation. If you're going to really move that into something that's population level scale, you need something basically where communities are self-policing. And that means they have to see enough benefit to the alternative to do it instead of what they're doing right now. So the particular program I'm thinking of is something called Fish Forever, which is an initiative of a group called RARE, working together with the Environmental Defense Fund and the University of California at Santa Barbara. They came up with a scientific solution to how to make sustainable and productive fisheries near shore, but needed to continue thinking about how to make that spread to large numbers of people. They were trying to work at national level initially in 5 countries: the Philippines, Indonesia, Mozambique, Brazil, and Belize. 5 of the biggest coastal fishing countries in the world. And the idea was, how can you either use markets or governments to try and change the dynamic so that thousands and thousands and thousands of communities self-police on that issue without your having to stand over their shoulder to try and do it. And it's a longish story as to the answers to that, but I will tell you that they're country-specific, the answers. For example, in the Philippines, a big part of the solution is working through the Council of Mayors and convincing them that they actually can preserve livelihoods for their people without asking anyone to take an undue burden in doing that, and that they can do that in a way that doesn't undermine their own authority as mayors, namely that build up popular support through the kind of social mobilization that tends to go with those programs. In the case of Indonesia, a little bit of that, but much more use of commercial markets, because it turns out some of the species that are harvested in Indonesia are of interest to commercial markets globally. And if you could find a way to aggregate those things, you could pay those people a substantial increment over their current livelihood. So in return for implementing the program, they have access to a major boost in their standards of living. If Belize, it was a different answer. Brazil, it was a different answer. Mozambique, it was yet a different answer. My point being only that in each case, you have to find an answer that works in that setting for why something that used to work on a small scale could possibly find its way into a large mainstream.